So yeah, here we are. So a little bit introduction about ourselves. So myself, Deepan, I'm a senior product manager here in DoubleCloud, responsible for the product features and also making the way for the roadmap and picking the new items based on the customer request so that it's added as part of the product portfolio. So that's kind of my role. And over to you, Lorenzo. Little bit about yourself and Gigapipe.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for having us. So I'm one of the co-founders. I actually entered later on in the lifetime of the company at Gigapipe. And Gigapipe today is a polyglot observability company and stack. So we focus on observability, of course, on top of ClickHouse.
Thanks, Lorenzo. We are still waiting for Sailesh to join. So once he joins, we'll talk to him as soon as he joins. So a little bit about DoubleCloud. DoubleCloud is a platform to build like sub-second data analytics on like the top-notch, well-known managed open source technology. So we have everything right from the data ingestion until the visualization. So all these components are beautifully crafted, kind of like a Lego blocks, which you can just choose and pick whatever you want, and you can build it all together. So that's what here it is about DoubleCloud. So here we're talking more about like open source and proprietary in terms of data stack, right? So speaking of which, I tend to come across this kind of big image with a lot of images. So what is it like? In fact, there are too many ways to build any data stack. Like on the left-hand side, you can see the open source way where there is like bunch of open source toolings. On the other side, there's a vendor lock-in way. But to be honest, it's very more difficult to manage either one of them. And also the vendor lock-in way, there's a lot of complexities. You don't have the freedom or the flexibility to move away from different tooling. So there's a lot of struggles, and also the costs are also heavily imposed by different providers actually. So and also in terms of performance, you don't really get the raw performance of the core, like the real native open source platform. So they build all layers on top of it. So there are chances that you skip on some functionalities, or some functionalities you need to pay for it. So that's the beauty of it, of the two different worlds. So why are we talking about it? So we have our two nice guests, and we wanted to talk about it from them and hear about it. Like, what did you do, and how did you manage, and what's the benefit that you got out of managed open source rather than going in a vendor lock-in way? So over to you, Lorenzo. Just could you share a little bit about the case to our audience to know more about like what was the case, and why you went for like an managed open source?
Absolutely. So a proper introduction. We are ourselves an open source R&D. So the entire stack that we use to run and what we provide to our users is open source, and it has been for since day one. We are very much, with the approach of our own product, a vendor locksmith, meaning that our solution actually doesn't have anything original in of its own, but it re-implements a bunch of very popular APIs and formats on top of ClickHouse, and in this case, on top of the DoubleCloud offer. So for us, it's really a pairing exercise, right? So internally, we are an open source vendor ourselves, and we have a product which is made with open source. So for us, it was essential to interface with the right vendor also when it came to the data layer, which is the only thing that we don't produce ourselves. So the ClickHouse layer, in this case managed by DoubleCloud, was the perfect pairing for our offering because of the way that it's operated. And I'm sure you're going to get into more details of that, but DoubleCloud essentially runs the open source version, and it manages the open source version of ClickHouse, which is exactly the one that we want to use. It would be the same that we would have operated ourselves. And for context, at the very beginning, Gigapipe was a ClickHouse provider. So we were
Before going to click, I was
used
just
to use
curious to
OnePass.
know like what metrics why did you go to open source? Like I know like there are a bunch of other beautiful managed open source, and
Oh, yeah.
what metrics or what steps did you internally took? Like, okay, this is a decision, we wanted to go open source.
Oh, yeah. Well, for us, open source, it's a choice of transparency, and it's because we believe that this is what our customers deserve, and want in most cases. So our entire product line has to be 100% transparent, especially when it comes to the data layer, because of complexity. We operate a lot of setups in legislations where it is important to provide the customer with the correct transparency end to end, from the source code all the way to how the service is offered. So all of the security and compliance aspects. So this is what we think is the deal when it comes to a managed provider running an open source version, is that they start with transparency, and they can either continue that transparency for the benefit of the user or not. So we know also of some vendors that take something that's transparent at the beginning, but then they turn it into an opaque product, and you don't really know what you're running on the other side. It says that it's ClickHouse, but is it really?
It kind of becomes like a black box for us, right? You don't know
Correct.
what's hiding behind. Yeah, that's
That
true.
is correct. And our primary role as a vendor is to choose partners that don't compromise this transparency. And I think in DoubleCloud we found that reality. So this is the essence of our choice of choosing open source, but also choosing a managed open source let's say platform that does respect that equation. And in this case, that's also active in the development of the platform that they host, which is again the case. One of the primary things that we use, for instance, is related to storage, and the hybrid storage on DoubleCloud is something that DoubleCloud has developed and contribute to the open source platform that we use. So we kind of like that approach of being involved but remaining completely, let's say, true to the open source nature in the process.
Indeed. I really like that it resonates with you as a customer, because our soul is also like, we wanted to be a managed open source provider, not really become like a yet another managed service, but we wanted to help companies who wants to be in open source, but also a little bit of a support to manage it. So that's where we wanted to, and we wanted to drive forward. So speaking of, you mentioned about ClickHouse, just curious to know about like what made the decision to shift to ClickHouse, and how was your architecture before we were moving to ClickHouse?
Well, first of all, we've been using ClickHouse ever since it's been usable. So from its very inception, let's say as open source, when it was still immature and whatever, I think we were one of the first R&Ds to actually jump on it and trying to bring it to production. So we have a very, very long, let's say, experience with this choice. Before that, we have been using, I think, just about anything else out there. We had a long history with also platforms like Elastic. We use Cassandra, of course, all of the classic databases. So, our customers come with a variety of problems, and they already have databases. So we've seen it all. But from a certain point on, it was a cost and performance related equation. So we've been able to replace, clusters of 20 nodes with 3 nodes when we started, seriously using ClickHouse. And this is the equation that we still, let's say, bring forward in terms of, cost effectiveness. So, smaller clusters with more power and, predictable performance line is really what makes the choice still worth to us. And then, of course, it has to be paired also with the right offer. So we like it within a predictable formula, if I can put it that way. So ClickHouse is great, and it works great when we know the boundaries of that service. So if it's gets too small or even too big, sometimes the equation is modified. So
Interesting.
also the type of so the approach that we have also with your with our clusters on DoubleCloud is that we don't have to we're part of the scaling, so everything that we want it to be easy is easy, but we're still in control. So I can still predict the performance and the cost, of course, of this service, which is super important when we have to, of course, provide it to third parties.
So how do you feel like the architecture has changed? Like how, right from the phase one that you mentioned about having it
Yeah.
locally, internally, and right now how you have it, and what's the
Well,
difference that you feel in terms of the benefits or KPIs that you have?
sure. Well, as we said, we used to be running our own clusters, so the complexity, of course, was reduced 90% as we transitioned into the hosted solution of DoubleCloud for our products, which themselves feed customers. So we were able to drop the complexity really that was making the scaling complex. Not too complex because, of course, we're technically skilled and we had a good design, but the real difference for us was in the security and compliance aspects. So for us, it was getting to the point where we were not spending time doing technical work with
And
ClickHouse,
doing the
but more,
compliance.
yeah, it was more becoming compliance and political
Yeah,
work on top of it, which requires 100%
agree.
precision, which at some point we judged being worth looking outward, and that's how we got to this partnership and joint venture, because I think in DoubleCloud this is really a principal aspect and one that our customers demand contractually. So you gave us basically the opportunity of not only reducing 90% of the technical complexity, but actually 100% of the security and compliance related aspects, which we found to be already extremely elegant. Of course, they have a long history of they're not improvised, let's say, in the way that they're implemented in DoubleCloud, and they happen to be just perfect. So our job became just let's say a provisioning one. So now we provision our clusters. We have fantastic monitoring. We're an observability company, so we're pulling all of the data out of those clusters, and it's just like if we were running them, because we're still both on the same AWS regions and whatever. So it feels like it's still our clusters, but we don't have the burden of managing them. To be honest, I think from a cost perspective, it was almost transparent.
Yeah, I think what you said is true. Like customers really, or based on other customers that we talk to, is also like one thing is like managed open source is good, fancy, but what comes along after that is also that's more important. Like, okay, do you have all the compliance in place? Because they have to serve this product under the hood to different customers, so they have to adhere to all this compliance, SOC 2 Type 2, or all these things. So it's another overhead. Like you build it on yourself, and to get all these certifications, compliance is it's a big another process layer on top of it. So
And I can tell you, our customers are mostly in the telecom and real-time communications field, so they handle private, private
yeah,
communications. It has a lot of details. So for them, I would say it is the number one priority. So for a company like us that deal with customers that produce or access or store, critical information, having this is like, a fantastic asset, because it just eliminates the opaque components of these solutions. They know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what they can count on from day one all the way through any scaling. So again, it makes security and compliance predictable instead of a black box, like you were saying
yeah.
before, that you just find out as you go.
So from your opinion, do you think like customers really want to move away from managing it on their own and then going to any managed service just because of this compliance and all these different hurdles?
Oh, yes, it's a major driver. So even those that can afford running it themselves, they have a preference for this, especially when they operate in multiple countries, multiple legislation. I mean, it's easy if you operate in a single country, you can
Yeah.
deal with that. But the moment that you start offering, in multiple regions, North America, Europe, different legislations, different laws coming in at very high velocity. So having a partner that's already able to deal with all of that stuff upfront and just being able to work on the service, on the performance, on the experience is an incredible asset. Yes.
Yeah, sure. So, speaking of like you mentioned about like having it run in-house, so there must be like certain challenges that you might have felt when migrating it to a different open source managed service, in this case, DoubleCloud. So, how did you manage that migration, and how did you really set it up in a more seamless way, moving from your own hosted to an managed open source tooling?
That's where open source shines, right? This gave us the precision that we needed to do something this complex. So migrating the platform migrating data between two platforms is always complex to begin with, but when those two platforms can be guaranteed to be essentially identical, so the
Yeah.
same exact version, the same code that I was running locally is part of the hosted or managed solution without surprises, without exceptions, without
Lock-in.
special aspects, made it easy. So what we did, actually, our transition was very natural. We just plugged both platforms at once. So at one point in time, we just started writing to the managed solution and reading from both until we exhausted all of the old data. So it was basically, a confluent approach, because it was just like extending our cluster. It was just like adding a few nodes with exactly the same technology, same APIs, same query language, same drivers. We had to change absolutely nothing. So it was just like adding more resources, and then we just let, let's say, customers transition to the new storage in the middle of production, so without interrupting the service, without any major operations. And as soon as the data, let's say, was exhausted in our local clusters, they were decommissioned. So within, I think, in the span of maybe a little over a month, we just moved everything over gradually and transparently. So our customers actually got the benefit, but they were not part of the exercise. So they didn't struggle, they didn't suffer, they didn't have any outages. And some of them don't even know that the underlying storage has changed. Most of them do, because of course we
Yeah,
informed them about the
I
new.
can imagine, like, if it would have been like moving to a vendor lock-in way, then you have to pay all that external fees, networks, and all those things. And might be the format is different, the version is different. So we have to write some custom scripts, custom queries. So yeah, it's really relatable that when it is both identical, it's more easy to just transform or move data from
Oh yeah,
one.
which is something that I would also add is not to be taken for granted, because there are other ClickHouse, of course, managed solutions where this is not the case. So some of them, especially, let's say, those that one would imagine to be the original, are actually not running the open source version. So for those, we of course we did due diligence. We didn't just pick the first option and chose it. We explored very, very deeply all of the other options. And for instance, the one of ClickHouse themselves, we discovered not to be ClickHouse. So the software that we were offered as part of the managed solution was not the same one that I was running locally. It was different things, different exceptions, different commands. And overall, we were continuously getting stuck. So the transparency is, again, the big winner here, I think.
And speaking of, like, since we're talking about evaluating different other managed ClickHouse providers, like, what other factors did you take into consideration when you are evaluating like different platforms?
Of course, cost and cost predictability is a major one, which I think in the offer that we picked with you is exactly how we wanted it. So I will know exactly how much I'm going to spend each month, unless I decide to make changes, unless I decide to scale. It gives me predictability. In other offers, it was more of a poker game. I couldn't always predict what the formula would apply like. And if one of my customers was spiking up, I was basically left with the results of this activity and not given any option on how to manage it. So I think that's also a major difference. Maybe here we have a more, I would say, because I am, and that's how I feel, more, old school approach of knowing exactly what you're purchasing and being able to max out what you're purchasing. So if I, buy some resources, I can get to 99% of those resources at any time, and I know where it stops. With other offers, you don't know where it stops. So when experimenting, especially when living on the edge like we do we take risks with covering other vendors protocols, other agents. External factors are at play with our type of game. So knowing that I can also lock my cost was a big factor in this choice. Then, of course, the skill set on the other side. So knowing that who's managing, my service knows what type of problems I'm going to run into, and they know exactly how the platform should behave, and they not only can say, "Oh, sorry, it works, it doesn't work," but they can actually participate in, actively
Yeah.
suggesting maybe better approaches for scaling, for stability, for redundancy, all of those things that make a great service happen on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So those were the factors. So the ability of the vendor to really understand and support our use case, and the ability to really choose the service that I want for my infrastructure, not to be enforced on a dynamic at all costs model that doesn't really have any boundaries. I find this to be really the sweet spot when it comes
And,
to choosing.
and did you already have like any tangible results that you already can share some results out of this migration, like some like what are your KPIs? Were you able to reach that certain KPIs in terms of infra internally that you had, or did you reach them already?
Well, I don't have a specific benchmarks, because I have as part of our products we have so many sub behaviors, right? In telecoms, things are very dynamic.
Mhm.
So you might have networks that are like flat behavior 24/7, and others that change with the way people use services. But what I can tell you, and what we enjoy the most, is how much we are saving with hybrid storage. That's the benchmark that's squashing all of the other benchmarks, is how much more flexible and cheaper the hybrid storage is. So with a product like ours that basically has a lot of inserts all the time, and then query behavior based on what the business requires, there's a lot of dynamic factor, but they always ingest a lot of data. Tens of terabytes per month can be ingested by an average customer, and then maybe they only read 5%. So
Yeah.
having all of that data on very expensive storage, or all on SSD, is essentially a waste of the customer's resources and money. The hybrid storage gives us that magic ability and a completely different cost profiling, for allowing our customers not to worry if they ingest a lot of data and they only read a little of that data, both from a performance, but performance to cost break even point of view. That's where it's something brand new that we didn't achieve ourselves on our own deployments. So our own, let's say, usage of S3, it wasn't as elegant as the average storage that we have on DoubleCloud. So that's a surprise that's actually factoring into the benchmarks in a surprising way, where essentially we have the same performance or unnoticeable difference. Nobody notices any change in the performance of the product, but we can pass them the savings, and that's quite shocking, because again,
And do you
sometimes
think,
benchmarks are about keeping the same performance with much less resources, not always going for the moon.
yeah, and do you think having these savings is also more like you have a control over the cost, which is true, but also you can make some decisions now to share this cost with customers. Like you can offer more discount because you have a lot of visibility. That kind of brings a new dynamics, right? Like you know that you're spending, let's say, $100 for this one, and then you can have control, and it introduces a new pricing also for customers, a better pricing. So it ultimately leads to more customers.
Oh yeah, and this is actually something that some of our customers found a little bit shocking at the beginning. At some point, when they have, our solution, of course, runs on our own clusters on DoubleCloud, and then we allocate space. But when a customer has specific demands, or simply needs a lot of flexibility, we actually bring them over, and that's something that most of them don't expect. And when this happens, they actually save, because of course our overhead that we have to add on top is gone, and they can make the deal of their dreams directly with the provider that's going to give them direct ownership of the data that our product produces. So it's kind of a triangle as well. Sometimes they just buy our, let's say, hosted ClickHouse. Other times we bring them onto the table, and they become a common customer, which can also scale differently. So passing this advantage to a customer has an incredible effect, especially anti-vendor lock-in, as you were saying at the beginning. Sometimes the vendor lock-in is hidden, right? There's another vendor behind the curtains that you don't know exists, and maybe that's where the lock-in happens. So in our case, we also have this ability to let the customer know exactly what's behind the scenes, and if they want, they can even bring their own account, which makes it spectacular. So it makes it 3D when it comes to choosing the depth of compliance that a specific setup wants to achieve.
And
Impossible with other providers, I can already tell you that.
And speaking of which, like, where do you see like where it's more suitable for any customers to go for a vendor lock-in way, and where do you feel like companies should go for a managed open source? Do you see a thin line where they need to make this decision? Like, it's fine, I can just go with a managed vendor lock-in way. It's fine with me.
Well, right, nothing is forever. So I always stress out my customer when choosing a vendor. They have to make sure that exactly they know what the vendor is running. If anything happens to that platform, if it goes down, if it goes out of business, or if it grows too much and changes the pricing model, you want to know that you're either able to take that service back for whatever reason, like the contingency plan of I can still run it myself. There's nothing mysterious about it. There's no
Yeah.
secret component that I would be deprived of when and if I have to scale down or make choices is an important factor. And here again, it's satisfied. I know exactly which version is running in my managed DoubleCloud cluster, and I know that if I have to test locally, reproduce it, or even take it back for whatever reason, I can. So this is a factor that for me it's essential when choosing a vendor. If they run something that you have no ability to run elsewhere or run yourself, that's a no-go as far as I'm concerned when I consult my customers. Then of course, some of them still choose or have to choose a vendor that doesn't fit that description. And in that case, at least the protocols that they use have to be compatible, which is where I think our product comes in, right? If somebody makes a choice of going with a platform like, I don't know, Datadog, and they invest in speaking that language, the day that it becomes too expensive and you have to change vendor,
To move away,
if you
it's
have to
really
change your entire stack,
pain.
you're
Yeah.
done. If you
Yeah.
can at least keep the protocols, then you have a way out. So that's, I think, the break-even point. Knowing exactly what they run, and if you don't know what they run, knowing exactly the protocols that you're using to communicate, so they can be taken elsewhere, are, I think, the two principles that should be followed for a healthy and reversible choice.
And
Because
also, especially, it makes sense more also ideally for like the small and medium sized businesses, like at least like startups. They're just trying to venture into the things that they wanted to experiment with the data, so they can really start with something like managed open source, and maybe they feel like, okay, this scale is sufficient for me, and maybe they want it later on, like once they find the pain of the scalability, that they have a lot of data, then they can see how they
yeah,
can manage it.
I always say the question to ask yourself is, what if I succeed?
Yeah.
What if it works, right? Then you're going to have that scalability
Yeah.
problem that in the modesty of the early days, not all teams keep into account. But this is the case where what if I succeed is not really a problem when you have a scalable vendor that doesn't conceal details, information, and technology from you. So having again transparency, knowing exactly how things are achieved is maybe eliminates the magic, right? But it gives you reliability and it gives you trust.
Interesting. And overall, like what was your experience in general? I know you touched base a little bit on double cloud. I just wanted to overall, what was the experience when you were working with double cloud?
Well, look, I mean, for us, it's been a long way coming. So there's always, even before we officially partnered, we were small customers, of course. So we entered as in discovery mode. And then when we had the opportunity to interact with the support team and with the technical team, is when we really said, okay, this is probably a good place for the Gigabyte product to sit on top, because we found excellence. So some vendors just say, try again, and some others, they explain to you what happened even when there's a problem, right? So this was the case. We ran into some issues which are mostly related to the way that we were abusing the service, and instead of hearing just use more resources, we heard an explanation of what we were doing wrong, what was showing. It's not necessarily something that happens with every vendor. So that transparency of knowledge and skills of knowing exactly how something should be operated and what should never be done is, I think, what attracted us into going deeper with the selection of this platform as well. There's skill set behind it. It's not just somebody running a couple of scripts. It's people with intimate knowledge of and evidently with a lot of flying hours under
Yeah,
their belt, operating real life clusters and not theoretical ones.
yeah, 100% agree. Because especially in your case, in your use case, when there is the complete logs aggregation observability is dependent on this whole complete data that's crunching. ClickHouse is crunching this, so you
Oh
really
yeah.
need that the performance. You cannot really expect it to just go out in like and then you can just, because you have other customers who are relying on Gigabyte, right? So it makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also we like, again, we are an open source. So our Gigapipe is, SaaS version of our open source anyway. So we need to make sure that everything that we do, people can also do locally. It's part of our offer, right? If something happens to us, you can do it elsewhere. You can do it yourself. Another vendor can come in with the same technology. This is important to us. So we don't want to, sacrifice opportunities. And if people choose to have a managed solution, it's because they need it and not because they have to. This tends to create, I think, also better business relationships with customers when you're just honest. Use what you need, don't without forcing them to make a decision that maybe is not ideal.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Thanks, Lorenzo. I think we had an interesting conversation and really touch base. I think our audience must have now got some clear ideas about like vendor lock-in, especially more about ClickHouse as well. We talked a little more about ClickHouse. So thanks for joining this webinar, and we look forward to see you in other webinars, and we'll stay connected.
Thank you so much for having us, and for everybody that's interested in observability. Now, I think it's also worth mentioning we're convergent. So the DoubleCloud can be monitored with Gigapipe, and Gigapipe stores in DoubleCloud. So we have a nice moment of convergence. So for anybody that's interested in observability, I'd love to hear from them and have a chance to show them what we're doing together. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.